Okay, everyone, let's talk about the Roman Empire. Got a squeaky chair. You can see the Roman Republic. Roman Empire comes after the end of the Roman Republic. The Roman Republic is going to come to an end during the age of Octavian, when Octavian takes charge and changes his name to Augustus, and that's when we get the Roman Empire. If I can get the slide to change, there it is, the Roman Empire. And you can see that this is the extent of the Roman Empire. So if we go back, you can see the Roman Republic. You know, the lands that the Romans control are just massive, from Spain, France, Italy, of course, into Asia and Egypt as well. But you can see now you expand during the empire into England, or Britain, Roman Britain as it's going to be called. And there's some Roman ruins in Britain. A little additional territory into Asia, into the old Persian Empire, into parts of Eastern Europe and Central Europe as well. This is where some of those Germanic tribes are going to be. So the Roman Empire expands, continues to expand, and continues to expand. And what makes this difference is that guy, Augustus. Caesar Augustus, but Augustus. Augustus is one of these words. It's translated in a variety of different ways. Blessed or fortunate, some sort of special one, someone who is blessed by the gods. Augustus becomes the first emperor. Augustus is the same person as Octavian. Augustus is a title that is bestowed upon him by the Roman Senate when he returns from Egypt after his successful battle against, let me have a bit of green tea here, against Cleopatra and Mark Antony. So Augustus is the same as Octavian. And you can see Augustus, his rule in Rome is going to last from around 27 or so BCE to 14 CE. So somebody was born during that time. We're in the Common Era on AD if we use the old Christian designation. One of the things that happens with Augustus is this: the Senate bestows on him a number of different titles, a bunch of different titles. The most important one is Augustus. Augustus is blessed and fortunate. Well, I shouldn't say the most important, but one of the most important ones is Augustus. Another one is the title of Imperator, because that comes with real power. Imperator. Imperator, empire, you just change the I to an E. That's how we get the Roman Empire. What imperator means is that he has total power over all of Rome's legions. He controls the military, and he has a powerful, large, permanent standing army. Whereas you had all these generals in the past who fought each other in the decline of the Roman Republic. Now he's got charge. He's got total power over Rome's legions. And these soldiers serve a long time, and they're paid. And that's the source of his strength. It's nice to have these titles like Augustus, or a title like Pontifex Maximus, which he has, meaning he is the high priest. The Pope is often called or used to be called Pontifex Maximus, high priest. That's a nice title to have. He calls himself Princeps Civitatis. That is, he just says that I'm just an ordinary Roman citizen. I'm the first citizen, but I'm an ordinary Roman citizen. He likes to portray that. No, he is the Emperor Augustus, and he rules Rome. He controls their legions. And year after year, he is elected to the highest office repeatedly as long as he's alive. But because he's called Princeps, and he calls himself that, we call this thing the Principate. His rule. Notice how the C doesn't work well. It's a K sound in the ancient languages. We have it as an S sound at times. So Princeps or Princeps, Principate. Don't worry about that. But he inaugurates a time of peace, nearly 2 centuries of peace, the Pax Romana that we're going to mention, the Roman peace, nearly 2 centuries of peace and prosperity. The Pax Romana, Roman peace, doesn't mean that there's no warfare going on. There's even civil war at that time. There are internal problems. It just means, relatively speaking, the Roman world is prosperous and there's a considerable amount of stability. I mean, we're talking about the ancient world. We're talking about life. It's hard to achieve long periods of peace and stability. So what does Augustus do? He rules technically with the Senate, but he limits their power. And he's the one in charge. He has his own personal bodyguard because it's a dangerous world out there. So he uses the Praetorian Guard, a special group, as his own bodyguard, the Praetorian Guard. One of the things about Augustus is that he promotes traditional values. Now, he himself has affairs with women. He's got a mistress, his wife. Make sure that his mistress attends to him well. But he promotes traditional values. He has a bachelor tax. He wants Romans to have lots of kids. He attacks divorce. He attacks bachelor status. He goes after single women for not getting married, even his own sister he does. So Augustus, he kind of has this sort of idea that he wants the traditional values within Rome, and those would be the traditional values, the myth of those values that Romans had in the Roman Republic. A couple of things that go on during his time period. He fights the Germans. He expands the boundaries of Germany, continues to build this elaborate and really impressive system of roads, moves into Spain, establishes additional territories. And one of the things that happens is the Romans fortify a lot of these areas, and they protect these areas. And over time, these places are built up with walls, the fortifications. Some of them become cities later on. Old European cities, some European cities emerge from old Roman fortifications. And notice how far Rome extends. It's a really impressive empire. This is going to actually be a map of the expansion of Rome under different emperors. You can see some of the 5 good emperors. We'll talk about them in a second. Trajan, Marcus Aurelius. Really impressive amount of territory that the Romans controlled. Remember, we're talking about Romans. We're not talking about Italians, although a lot of them are Italians. One of the things going on in the Pax Romana in the age of Augustus, the Principate, is you see the flourishing of literature and poetry. This is the time of Virgil's Aeneid. This myth about the founding of Rome by Aeneas, this Trojan warrior, sort of ties it into Romulus and Remus. You know, it's a great patriotic epic. That tradition of epics goes back to Gilgamesh, the Homer's epic, and this sort of continues with that sort of tradition. Poets, there are a number of poets writing, Ovid and others. Ovid actually gets in trouble for writing a bit scandalous, lustful poetry, sexual poetry, gets in trouble with Augustus for that. Not that Augustus doesn't like that, but he's trying to promote a particular wholesome image. And one of the things he likes about the poets at that time, and he encourages them, even in historians like Livy and Tacitus, is to focus on certain themes. How wonderful the Principate is, how wonderful life is in Rome, or this wonderful past that Livy writes about the Roman Republic. Livy is an historian who writes about the Roman Republic, volume after volume. Only a few survive, but he talks about the greatness and virtues of all these ancient Romans, and that's what Augustus wants Romans to sort of model their behavior on. Tacitus, he writes a book on Germania about the Germans, actually quite admiringly of the Germans in that book, Germania. And as I said, he promotes wholesome values, or at least the idea that Romans need to return to the virtues that old Romans once had. You know, there's a bit of nostalgia involved in that. Even people today, the elderly today, often criticize what's going on with the values in this country. You know, that sort of thing. And so he attacks particularly this whole notion of female sexuality and sexuality in general. He promotes his family as an ideal family and a model for others. And so even his sister he attacks, his daughter. As I mentioned, he goes after bachelors. They have to pay a tax since they're not married and not having kids. And not having kids is one of the things that goes on in his attacks on homosexuality. Obviously, Romans practice that. The Greeks practice that. He considers it immoral, and primarily because often no children result from that. But a lot of Romans, I wouldn't say a lot, but many Romans actually engage in that practice. Dynasty. Now, Augustus is going to rule and establish this Roman peace, Pax Romana, for about 2 centuries. And we know that he establishes an empire because he creates a dynasty that succeeds him. And these are the 3 dynasties that follow Augustus. The Julio-Claudians, the one that he helps establish, the Flavians, Domitian, Titus, the 5 good emperors. 5 good emperors are kind of interesting. This is the time period when you have an emperor, Nerva, who actually doesn't serve that long, who decides that what's best for Rome is to find what he thinks is the most qualified individual, adopt him as a son, so that that individual can take over and rule Rome and preserve Roman stability and prosperity. And it essentially works out that way for these 5 good emperors. That's what they do. The last of the 5 good emperors is Marcus Aurelius, who is a Stoic philosopher who has some interesting things to say in his meditations. But he also has a son called Commodus. And I'm not suggesting that the movie Gladiator with Russell Crowe is historically accurate, but Commodus is not regarded as a great Roman emperor. He was a lousy Roman emperor. That is, Marcus Aurelius ended that practice of having finding the best man available for the job and adopting them as a son to replace them. And instead, his lousy son, that emperor, took over. But Rome survives. Rome can survive some bad emperors and some bad people. And when you look at the Julio-Claudians, you had Nero at this time, who started a civil war. Notice the 2-year gap there. This is also a time of Julio-Claudians. One of them was Caligula, who was just a sort of vile degenerate as emperor as well. A couple of things going on, the culture of Rome. We know about the gladiatorial combat. That it continues. Gladiatorial combats are very popular. And they're part of this elaborate spectacle of circuses, the Circus Maximus, where you had some of the chariot racing. And chariot racing remained the most popular sport. The gladiatorial combats, really violent sports. Part of this whole notion that historians later talk about is bread and circuses. This is a time period where, in order to take care of a lot of the poor and homeless, they're giving free bread, that is free grain, free food, olive oil, some wine. That is, it's an elaborate welfare state. And bread and circuses refer to this elaborate welfare state that happens in Rome with food and entertainment. Now, the gladiators are kind of interesting. Many of them are slaves or prisoners of war. They fight. They don't always fight to the death. Some are going to gain their freedom, but and some become incredibly famous if they're successful in these gladiatorial contests. But it's a sport that's really well liked by the Romans. They really love that sort of thing, sort of bloodlust, very violent. They often fight to the death, and they fight lots of animals. Even one event had apparently had the Colosseum flooded, so you can have a sort of naval gladiatorial contest. A couple of other things going on. I mentioned the extent of the Roman conquest, the amount of territory they took over. Well, one of the things they do is they take over other people with their own culture, their own traditions, their own beliefs. Some of them are much more sophisticated than the Romans, and you begin to see sort of a blending in the Roman provinces of Roman cultural ideas, Greek cultural ideas with other cultural ideas. And this is where we get to see some of the origins of these languages that emerge in some of these places, like Spanish and Portuguese and French and those things. Religiously, you see new religions popping up, mystery religions becoming popular or remaining popular and also changing some of their beliefs. You see a blending of some of the different religions, even some Roman myths adopt non-Roman religious ideas. And so it's a very interesting thing where you begin to see that, yeah, the Romans control this, but in a lot of areas, there are all these little unique cultural innovations that are preserved, and there's a blending of Roman culture, and that's of Asian culture, African culture, and different cultures around Europe, and that's going to be the basis of Western Europe, or at least influence Western Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire in the West. And one of the things that becomes important to Western Europe during the time of this Roman Empire is the arrival of Christianity. There is a province in the Roman world known as Judea, and the Romans gained control of Judea. That's the land of the Hebrews, the Jews. And around this time, there are a number of different movements going on among the Jewish population. There is this idea that we need to, as Jews, we need to resist Roman rule militarily. We need to fight against the Romans, kill Roman tax collectors. Those people who want armed rebellion against the Romans are called zealots. Really don't have much of a chance resisting Romans militarily. That's not a wise move at that time. And there are others at this time that embrace a bit of apocalypticism. That is, the world is coming to an end, or they have a messianic tradition. That is, they're awaiting a Messiah. Some see it as a political Messiah. Some see him as a religious Messiah. And some see him as sort of a military leader who's going to lead the Hebrews to establish the independent Hebrew kingdom again. So you got these ideas floating around Judea at the time of Christianity, at the time of Jesus's birth, and as he lives, and dies as a young man. And again, you have pagan ideas that influence this part of the world. So it's kind of a world in search of some meaning that Jesus is born in. He's born in Judea at the time when zealots are active. And we know basically what we know about Jesus comes from the New Testament. Ultimately, the New Testament is developed later on, particularly the Gospels. And the Gospels, there are 4 of them. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And only a couple of them talk about the birth of Jesus, which is why, if you notice up here, I have around 4 BCE. It's so we're not exactly sure when Jesus was born, whether he was born during the time of King Herod or the time of that Roman census. And there are these mysteries. We just don't know a lot about the early life of Jesus. We know about the time when he begins his life of preaching and healing and all of that. Later on, when in adulthood, we get only glimpses in the Gospels. And we have to remember the Gospels are written decades after Jesus's death. But apparently, what was going on is that Jesus gathers a large following, which threatens, or at least which Pontius Pilate, who's a Roman leader at that time, sees as a big threat. And particularly because of some religious holiday going on. So Pilate, along with a few others in the Jewish community, the Sadducees in particular, who are sort of the upper class, are going to condemn Jesus. And Pilate is going to go along with this, and Jesus is going to be crucified, probably for sedition. Crucifixion is a common practice for Romans. It didn't just happen to Jesus or the Christians, as you know. And so Jesus is crucified and rises from the dead. And he becomes the Christ. The Christ is an interesting term. Christ it comes from the Greek word. Remember, koine is the language that is sort of the universal language at that time. Christos means Messiah. So the Christ, Jesus, is the Messiah, and that he ushers in this spiritual kingdom. He's not a military leader, sort of render under Caesar those things which are Caesar's. Pay your taxes and all that. He is a leader of a spiritual kingdom, and because he rose from the dead, if you follow Jesus, embrace his teachings, you too, through his grace, have the opportunity to gain immortality, that idea. So, and that's what we see. This resurrection is at the heart of being a Christian and embracing Christianity. And what we see early on are some Christian communities who are struggling as to what to do after Jesus rose from the dead. What do we do? How do we behave? Many of them obviously were Jewish. Jesus himself was Jewish, probably a rabbi. All of his followers were Jewish. So what do? Do you still follow Passover? Do you follow Jewish rituals? Now, at times you would see Christians gathering in homes and just participating in a few rituals, some Jewish rituals, but also the Eucharist, taking in the body and blood, communion, the body and blood of Christ. That often happened, but we still don't have a separate and distinct religion that emerges until really into the 2nd century. In fact, there's kind of a bit of an issue. What do you do about the teachings of Jesus? One of his disciples, Peter, says initially that his teachings are only for Jews. So that if you want to accept Christ, you have to become Jewish. You have to follow all the rituals, and of course, you're going to have to be circumcised. That might be a challenge for a lot of adult men who want to convert. Saul of Tarsus, though, is a bit of a key figure. He's often called the second founder of Christianity, although he probably wouldn't appreciate that title. But he's very important in spreading the faith because he is the key figure who travels around the Roman world, converting people to Christianity. He wasn't originally a Christian. He originally persecuted Christians, and then he has a vision from Christ, and he becomes a Christian, and then he begins this sort of crusade to spread the gospel of Christianity. And for Paul, what's important is that you convert now. The second coming is imminent. I can't even pronounce that. So convert now. Don't worry about Jewish law. Don't worry about Jewish rituals. Don't worry about circumcising yourself if you're in. Just convert so that you can be saved. And if you look at the New Testament, most of the New Testament is actually composed of letters from Paul to various Christian communities, primarily Greek communities. So Paul is absolutely crucial in the spread of Christianity. And this is a part of what he means here. When you look at his letter, first letter to the First Corinthians, his letter, for just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many are one body, so it is with Christ. For in one spirit we are all baptized into one body. Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, and we're all made to drink of one spirit. That is, this is a religion that's for everyone. It's openness to all, even women. There's an equality in salvation for women, although let's not think that women are treated equally necessarily within that religion as well. One of the things that's interesting is we find evidence that a lot of women led the early Christian sort of rituals and religious practices, and that's going to change a little later on. And here you see Paul's travels in establishing churches all over the Roman world, and even into Italy itself. So we see the spread of Christianity, and Paul is very important in that. Now, ultimately, we know Christianity is not just, say, a sect of Judaism or part of Judaism. It becomes its own unique, separate religion, distinct from Judaism. And there's this split in which Christians and Jews don't particularly get along, and that sort of animosity, particularly Christians have for Jews, lasts centuries and centuries, well into the modern age. The sort of anti-Semitism, because Christians often, the old belief for a lot of Christians was that the Jews killed Jesus. You know, that's what anti-Semites believe. Even though Jesus was Jewish and all of his followers were Jewish, and the Romans actually crucified Jesus, by the way. So Paul, one of the things about the Pax Romana is that Paul can travel on all these roads. Other missionaries can travel these roads spreading the gospel. So that's what you begin to see, and people convert. Not a lot. It's still a tiny, tiny religion, a sect among all these other religions in the Roman world, but they spread. Women are active in spreading Christianity because women gain equality, that is, equal opportunity for salvation. And that's the key. Salvation is a big, big part of it. And this whole notion of brotherhood and sisterhood, I guess, this sense of community. You know, you have a role to add more brothers and sisters, fellow Christians, and spread the word. That's a big part of your duty. And early on, we see Christians, you know, you follow the commandments, you read from the Old Testament, and you make sure that you follow the commandment that says, love one another. How do Christians get along with Romans? Well, it depends on the time period. At times, Christians are persecuted. Christians are viewed as an alien force. Christians are viewed as sort of uncitizen-like because they're pacifists. They don't want to fight. They don't recognize the Roman gods. They refuse to even recognize Roman gods. How dare these people do it? So at times there are attacks on Christians. Some Christians are killed, you know, thrown to the lions, as you may know that phrase. But at times it's okay. You know, it also depends on the emperor who's in charge, whether you allow Christians to worship and practice or ignore them, or whether you persecute Christians. Often the persecutions happen when something unfortunate or unexpected happens in the Roman world. You can see Trajan, he's one of the 5 good emperors. Leave Christians alone. And that is, we're looking at into the 2nd and 3rd century Christianity is growing. And you also begin to see a church structure emerging. One of the things that happens is, early on, Paul and others said, convert to Christianity, convert right away. Second coming is imminent. Well, when that didn't happen, people come together and decide it's time to organize Christians into an actual institution with its own hierarchy. So you begin to see that. Officials like deacons and priests, even bishops. Bishops are very important. Bishops have control over a diocese. They make decisions about what to believe. They decide which versions of Christianity are acceptable and which are heresies, that is, unacceptable, false teachings. You know, they help deal with a lot of these sort of theological disputes. You know, what are Christians supposed to believe? Well, somebody has to come up with that. You look at the letters of St. Paul, and also if you're educated, you follow some of the ethics that maybe Aristotle had talked about or some others, and you reach decisions. You know, we have to remember people were products of their time, so they're influenced by the culture of the world around them. And so we see an institutional church emerging with priests and bishops and archbishops even, and patriarchal bishops, patriarchs, great fathers of the church, which have considerable power, including the patriarch in Rome, who is going to be called the Pope. And we'll talk about that upcoming. But Christianity is growing and growing and growing, and it's growing and spreading as the empire is in decline. One of the things that happens if you look at these dates, the age of the 5 good emperors comes to an end when Commodus, the son of Marcus Aurelius, takes over. And it's just a lousy emperor. I mean, horrible things. He thought he was a gladiator, and he would often fight people who were disabled and didn't have any protection. He might give them a stick and he would hack them to pieces. An absolutely bloodthirsty individual. He's going to be killed. And then he's followed by a group of rulers, starting with Septimius Severus from North Africa, a North African general, called the Severan dynasty. And you can see there are a number of figures here. And the barracks emperors. You can imagine what the barracks emperors are. These are basically military leaders who, one by one, march into Rome and try to take over. And they frequently do that. And they kill each other. I think only one survives to like retire. Basically, all of these barracks emperors have a bloody end. And so it's these military commanders. And what's happening at the time is that they're leaving the Roman borders pretty open to invasion. And so you're going to begin to see some Germanic tribes move into the Roman world. So the Roman world is disintegrating. It's in disarray. It's sort of like the decline, that century of decline for the Republic that's happening in the Roman world, as just basically roads, all kinds of things are just falling into sort of disrepair. And we will stop there and pick up later.